Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs, a unique twist in the art of wire. This is DDLynn, and I'm so excited today to share how to make this really easy bracelet with you. And the basics of this are really quite simple. And I designed this, I don't know, over a year ago. I've made some changes since then, but you're basically going to have a center stone, and then you're going to have two accent stones. And then we're going to attach, if you will, these two sidewall decorative pieces of copper designs. They're almost like a clasp over here. And then we're simply going to add jump rings and a hook, and then a little delicate drop. And I also made some matching earrings, and they're along the same concept with the bracelet design. So you can see that it's similar to that. So before we get started, I'd really appreciate everyone if you'd hit that subscribe button down below, and your comments and feedback are greatly appreciated. If anyone knows YouTube, in order to get monetized and justify anyone out there doing this stuff over and over and over again for free, you have to have over 1,000 subscribers and so many viewed hours, and it's pretty crazy. But in any event, I'd like to continue to do this for free. I know it's been a little bit longer than usual that I've posted another tutorial, and that's because I have so many other obligations. So anyways, really appreciate that, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me in this unbelievable community in the ancient art of wire. So let's get started. So the first thing that I did is I looked at my stone, and you always need working wire. So this is a drilled through stone. If you look down on my board here, this is 1 inch to 1 inch. And so I round up, and I always do that because I know that I'm going to need some excess to work with. Now, the bigger gauge wire that you can use, and what I mean as big as possible, is what you want to use in your stone based on your bead hole size. So I couldn't get 16 gauge in there, but I was able to get 18. Now in my original, I actually ran the wire all the way through. And like I said, I've changed this up quite a bit since then. And then I continued with attaching the bead. Well, what's happened so that you can avoid this learning edge or process is from being on the wrist and moved a lot, it hardened the wire. And luckily for me, it was my sister that got my first design, and it snapped the wire. So we're going to attach our wire separately to our focal bead, and this is going to sit on our wrist like this. So the second thing I'm going to recommend is that you get out a series of beads. And I'm just using an example here of some copper, Amazonite, some different crystals, and whatever your vision is. So I, based on my bead size, and this is halite, I measured 3 inches because I want at least 1 inch working space on each side. And there's a reason for that. Some people would say, well, you don't need 1 inch to complete your closed loop. No, you don't, but you need at least 1/2 inch. And I like to wrap a couple of wraps around my core wire. So that's why I'm using 3 inches, 1 inch for the stone and 1 inch on each side. The second thing that you're going to need is to cut 2 pieces of 6 inches, 16 gauge wire. You need your wire strong enough, and you're going to have to hammer it to support itself on your wrist, and I'll show you what I mean. Now, I know that this piece right here, based on my center piece, and let me measure for you, this is a little over 1.25 inches, so almost 1.5 inches. So you need to take that in consideration, the stone size that you're going to use, okay? And so that's going to give you an idea of how long you want your wrist cuffs. I don't want mine really close together. This is meant to be loose. So I also want to give myself a lot of slack. So and if you're watching me here, I'm holding the cuff itself, and I can decide on the length that I need based on a person's wrist size. My wrist is about 6¼ so it's really cool not to have this super long, so that you really have a lot of leeway and leniency to add change so that it will fit anyone's size. And then I dropped a little darling bead here, and you can dangle anywhere you want. So when I measure these after they're completed, they sit, and I have to take into consideration if they were completely flat, about 2 inches. Now I've arced these over to hug the wrist, so you can see that they're resting beautifully on your wrist. So you're going to use 6 inches, and I would recommend for anyone, especially beginners, that you mark your wires. Okay, so I've marked my wires there. And I've got myself a 2-inch circumference cork. You can use a ring mandrel, wood dowel. There's these little plastic things you can buy online. But the wire slides on this too much. And when I'm using 16 gauge, I need a better grip. 18 and 20 would work fine on this. So I'm going to use my 2-inch cork, and I've marked the center of my wire, and I'm going to evenly put pressure on both sides. Because 16 gauge is a much stronger wire, meaning it's more hard to manage, I want to really control what I'm doing. So I am pushing my wires against the side walls, and then I'm going to turn it around, and I'm just squeezing them together. And the reason why I'm doing them at the same time is I want them to be as equal as possible. So now I have my shape, my overall shape, and we're going to be doing a little tweaking, but I'm just going to cross them over. And I'm just doing that to get a desired teardrop shape. And again, I'll be tweaking these. So now I'm going to take them off my cork, and I should have 2 pretty darn good symmetrical bracelet cufflinks. And they really are links. They're being attached to the bracelet. So I don't want my cuff that round. You can have it any size that you want. So I'm just going to bring in my flat nose, and I'm just going to squeeze these in. And I'm going to do a little bit at a time. And I'm always going to turn, this is a really good tip, always going to turn my wire over so that I'm evenly squeezing the same on each side. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pick up my other piece, and I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm just squeezing in on the highest arc of each side, and I'm going to turn it over and squeeze in a little more, and I'm going to match these up. So I can see that I have more of a point on this one. I'm going to round that out a little bit, and I'm just going to bring in my pliers and just push off the top. That's going to round it out a little bit more. So those look pretty even to me. Now, I know that I'm going to want this to sit, and I'm going to put my stone on my wrist. I got things flying all over the place here. So let me just take that wire out. So I know that I want that to sit here, and I want this to wrap around my wrist. So this is basically going to be going like that. And I want this, once it's finished, about 2 inches. It can be longer, but I really want gap space here because I'm going to utilize that space so that it's a multi-fit bracelet. So now I'm looking at both of these and they seem to be lined up pretty good. So all I'm going to do is get, sorry for my hands there, I'm going to get my bent nose and I'm just going to come in right at the cross. And this is a really great tip, and you can do the same thing when you're making bails. I'm going to hold firmly the body of the wire where I've made my loop, and I'm going to squeeze these together, and that's going to line them up. And when you're working with 16 gauge, it's not as easy to make corrections with it as you would with a softer gauge wire. So I'm going to take a look at that. And then I'm going to square this up a little bit more. So this is kind of what we should have. You can have it rounder if you want. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to grab and hold firmly, and right at the cross, I'm going to squeeze these 2 wires together. And just take a look at that. And then I'm going to just line them up. And they look pretty parallel to me and symmetrical. So now I'm just going to make some adjustments, kind of square them up a little bit more. And let me take a look at this one. See, this side's bent in more right there. So I'm just going to come in here and bend that out a little bit more. And then I'm just going to take a look at these, and I'm going to kind of square this side up a little bit, a little round for me. It's rounder than the other side. So I'm looking at these and they look pretty good, because what we're going to do is we're going to hammer the outside of these cuff attachment links. And I'm going to have to do that outside, so I'm going to go off camera. And we're going to hammer them before we do any attachment or closing off, okay? Notice how I've used, sorry about the tag there, I've used a half round wire on this to close these 2 wires together. So the first thing I'm going to do is even up my legs. So I'm going to get my super flush cutters, and I'm just going to even up those legs. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, then I'm going to line them up on my measuring board, and they look pretty even. So I noticed I got a little bend in my wire here, and you know what, you guys, we're going to hide that anyways, but I'm particular, so I'm just going to straighten that kink. And if you're a beginner, the best way you can take a slight bend out of your wire is to use the widest part of the jaw on any plier. And try to use a plier that doesn't have a super sharp edge. So these I got from a guy that did tutorials a couple of years ago. I can't remember his name. He's really cool. And if I find him, I'll link you to his page. He designed these. These are actually used to wrap your half round wire. And your half round wire would fit in between here and here. Right in there. I found them difficult to work with. He does really masterfully. But what I really love about these pliers is the edge isn't sharp. So when you're straightening your wire, you just simply want to come up the widest part of the jaw and slowly squeeze that wire together and keep turning and squeezing, not hard, but firm enough to take the bends or kinks out of your wire. So now I know these are pretty squared up. So I'm going to hammer them and I'll be right back. So I've taken my 2 cuff link attachments and I took them out to the garage and I have hammered them and also did a texture on them. So this is what we should have. 2 as close to possible identical cuff bracelet links. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set these aside. I need to move my chair up so I can see what I'm doing. And we're going to attach the wire to our bead. So I had mentioned earlier that I cut myself 3 inches because I rounded my bead up to 1, and this is 1 to 1 here. And so I have exactly 3 inches of wire. And all I'm going to do is create a loop. So I am going to bend this back, and I'm using 18 gauge as a reminder in this bead. And then I'm going to use this second step on my 6-step bail making pliers. They're also known as barrel or loop making. And these are multifaceted. If you're a beginner, I really encourage you to start working with these if you're trying to make really perfect, beautiful loops, because they'll help you out so much versus having the way I started was, let me show you. I would have to measure and tape my round nose to try to get the precise exact size each time. So it's really a good thing if you can, as an investment, to get some of these, and they're just multifaceted. So all I'm going to do is take my bead out just for right now, and I'm going to push my wire up and over, and then I'm going to rotate my wrist because I need to adjust it, and then I'm going to rock it so it lines it up like a perfect P. And I'm going to push that wire around. Let me just take it out so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this sets me up when I do that, and I really have a beautiful little P shape, the letter P. And then I'm going to get my chain nose, and I'm going to have to switch hands here. You do whatever works for you. And I need 2 sets of chain nose because I'm going to be using 1 to hold my loop, okay? So I'm going to hold my loop right there. I'm going to get a good grip on it, and I'm just going to adjust that in there like so that it's not in the way. And then, because this is 18 gauge, it's a stronger wire, I'm going to start pulling my wire around. And then I'm going to squeeze it. Okay. I'm going to turn my loop over because you need to give yourself the best anchor that you have. And I'm just going to grab my wire on the tip, and I'm pulling it back around. And then I'm going to squeeze it. And now you can understand why I used 1 inch in length, because I wanted to wrap this around the leg of this loop wire 2 times. So if you look at where I started, the bend in my loop, this is 1, 2 wraps. And as I come around the back, that would complete my 2nd wrap. Now here's a really cool tip. I personally, and also really important, you guys, if your wire loop is going to hang this way, just make sure that you have, and what I mean is setting on your wrist in this direction where the loop is flat against your wrist, not up like this. So you really want that loop. You want a front and a back, because you don't want your little tail leg here that we're going to cut off You don't want that sticking up on top. I know that I want my loop to lay against my skin, okay? Because I'm going to be connecting a bead here, right? So I'm going to make sure that I have a front and a back. And let me just grab my pliers. And for those of you that watched my tutorials before, I do not like flush ends, especially with anything that I cannot hide or that I can feel. So I'm going to hide this end, and this is a cool tip. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of on an angle come up and underneath that. And I'm going to shave it. Can you see that shave mark there? And then here's another cool tip, trick, and technique. I use files a ton. So I'm going to just file that off because this is going to be sitting against the skin until I can't feel one little tiny sharp anything. And also it's now hugging around that base wire that we made the loop off of. So your telltale is to lay it on your wrist and rub it back and forth in different directions. And if you can't feel anything, you're good to go. Now I'm going to put my bead in. And this is kind of what you should have. And the shape of this bead is higher on one side than the other, which is why it appears that my wraps are sticking up above the hole, and they are because it's higher. So I'm going to find the low side. That's going to be my low side. So now it looks like they're sticking exactly up off the top of the stone. And we always don't get that choice, but hey. So now I'm going to turn this around, and I know that I'm going to have my loops in the same direction, and I'm looking to where I made my bend before. And what I mean is I bent it here. So in order to make sure that the loops are going in the same direction, do you see how this kind of rides over? That's the easiest gauge of knowing where to bend your loop again. It's kind of like riding on the wire and over. So when you're looking at it on this angle, it almost looks off center. Do you see that? Where on this side, the loop is actually tucked and bent in. So I always start with I call it the wonky side, so that I know I'm in check and I'm doing it the same way each time. And I'm going to give myself a little gap, about 1 millimeter, because I need that gap space to run 2 wraps of wire around. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of a gap. I'm going to bend the wire back. I'm going to use the second step on my 6-step pliers. And I'm just going to roll my wire back. And then as before, I'm going to bring that around. And now again, you can see why I use 3 inches of wire. And I'm going to rock that to line it up. Then I'm going to get and I'm hoping I have enough wire here. I might have cut it a little short. My chain nose. And I'm going to bend. And I'm going to turn my pliers around. I mean, not my pliers, my bead. Well, I guess I'm turning my pliers around too. And I'm really squeezing that wire in because I need that length there. Because I want this tail to end up on the same size that I started. So I'm thinking, you guys, maybe, boy, am I a lucky girl, right? So I'm going to turn this around again. And at least it's on the back side. We're always compromising and making adjustments as we go. So I was a little shy on length here, but that's okay, because this is going to be the back. And all I'm doing is squaring up my loops. Just square them up, okay? So this is going to be my back, and my bead is going to sit like this. So now I'm going to add my accent beads. Straighten that out a little bit and pull this in. Okay, now here's another cool tip. If you haven't watched my videos before, for those of you that watch me, if I can find it, I'm looking for my white buffer, my favorite. I get these by the box on Amazon, and the reason why I buy them by the box is that they lose their sandpapery stuff really quick because they're very, very light. They're not going to scratch, and I like them a lot for buffing. So I just, if I have any nicks, I'm just going to buff them right out of my wire. And what's nice about the sponge versus the file has a flattening effect, where the sponge doesn't. It's not going to change the shape, but it's just going to buff your nicks out, and you can really give this some gorilla rubbing, and it's not going to hurt it at all. So I know this is my front, and so I noticed there was a couple little nickies in there I didn't like, and it happens. So I'm going to move that aside. So now we're going to attach our beads, and I have taken out some beads, as I mentioned, and I'm thinking, and I wish you guys could, this was live and you could tell me which one, but I kind of like to line everything up next to it, and I'm thinking those copper beads for me are too big. So I think I want something smaller, and I think just to brighten it up a little bit, I'm going to use crystals. I was thinking about these really pretty Amazonites. These are 8mm. And I tend to like to put everything on my wrist, and then I will lay what I'm thinking about against that piece, and then I'll do it again. And you could put anything here. I personally really like the crystal. So I am going to create my loops for my crystals. And again, based on how big your hole is, try to use the thickest gauged wire you possibly can to make, you know, it really strong and durable. So I'm going to take a look at and see if I can get 20 gauge in there. I'm pretty sure I cannot get 18, but I'm going to try if I can. So here's my 20 gauge spool, and that easily goes in there. So maybe I'll get lucky and get my 18 in there, if I can find it. Sorry about my arm. Just so that you guys, well, I can't even show you right now. I got this new camera holder, so you guys, it won't be falling over. You know how many times I've corrected my camera falling over. You all know that've been watching me. It's a real bugger. So let's see if I can get 18 gauge in there. If I can, I'm going to be super happy. And I can, yay! So I'm very excited about that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, because my bead is so tiny. I'm going to cut myself 2 1/4 inches of wire, and I'm going to cut myself 2 pieces of that. So there's one. And here's 2. I'm going to make a loop like I did before, but this time I'm going to use the smallest. So on my 6-step barrel. So we have 6, and I'm going to use number 1, the smallest. And I'm going to put it in my bead just so I can have an idea of where center is and where I want to bend off. And I'm going to have a lot of excess with this bead, but that's okay. I want to make sure that I do, considering I barely made it on this focal bead, which is going to sit like that. So I'm going to get my chain nose, and I'm going to bend this back and take my bead out, get my smallest step, and I'm going to use my index finger, and I'm going to bend that wire up and towards me. So this is kind of what you should have. And everybody has their own technique of doing this. There's no right or wrong, whatever works for you. I just adjusted my pliers. If you noticed, I was in this position and my wrist can't go any further. Ergonomically, we're not designed to turn in very much. So I'm adjusting my wrist so that I can use my fingers. And you notice that it's cocky, it's off center. So I'm going to hold the wire here, and I'm just going to rock. So I turned my wrist in and rocked it towards me, or pushing my thumb away from me, or turning my wrist into me. So I rocked it to line it up, right? So now I need to attach it to my bead before I continue closing off this loop, because I don't want this to go anywhere. And in order to do that, you want to open up your loop just a little bit, okay? Do you see how I open that up? And then I'm going to slip it through this loop. So this is what you should have. And then I'm going to get my pliers. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold my loop. And the first thing I'm going to do, actually, you guys, is I need to press this down so that it's flush against the core wire, right? Its leg. So it should be something like this, just so that you can see. Then I'm going to get my pliers, and I'm going to need my needle nose here, because the smaller the loop, the less working room we have to hold it stationary so it doesn't move around. And then as before, I'm just going to twist this around, and I'm going to do 2 full rotations. And before I complete it, and this is key, to figure out where you want to cut off, because you have to remember now, this one's laying flush against your wrist, and this one's going to be kind of sticking up more. So I know it's going to go like this. So I want to cut this wire off on the back. So I'm going to swing it around a little bit more. And this is going to be really durable in comparison to the one I did over a year ago. And I'm just going to make sure that while I'm holding this and looking at it and then turning it over, that wire is going to rest in the back. So as before, I'm going to just cut off some length first so I can get up underneath this. I'm going to cut that on a very on a very sharp angle. And then this is where my file comes in, not my buffer. And this is a 100/180 grit file, which means this side is really rough. So if you were really needed to take some copper down, this would be the side you'd use. And this side is 180, so it's really soft and fine. And it's perfect for what we need it to do. And I am really filing into this. And I'm kind of going in the direction of the loop. So it's almost as if it's going to disappear and kind of melt into that loop that's going around the wire. And I don't want to feel a thing. If I feel anything, I'm going to keep doing it. Now you could take your buffer or a drill. And so now I know that that's on the back side. And here's what we have. So I'm going to square this little loop up. I'm noticing he's kind of rocking. It's kind of hard for you to see it, but he's kind of rocking this way. So I'm just going to get my pliers in here and just square it up. Because that's how it's going to sit on my wrist. Then I'm going to grab my other bead and I'm going to line it up. I'm going to leave myself a little bit of a gap. That might have been too much of one. I'm going to soon find out. And again, I'm using the smallest part or the smallest step on my 6th step. And this time I'm going to close it off because I'm going to slip it on my cuff link here for my bracelet. I'm going to slip it right on that. So I'm just rolling this towards me again. And this is kind of what we're looking at. Then I'm going to adjust my wrist and I'm going to lift this wire up and spin it around as I rock this, and I'm turning my wrist towards me to square up those 2 loops. Okay? Take that out, get my needle nose, and I'm going to create 2 wraps. And I'm going to squeeze it in there good and tight. Turn it around so I have some leverage here. Good anchor points. I kind of need to bring this down a little bit. It's riding a little high up on the loop. There we go. I could feel that just slide right into place there. Okay. And then I'm going to bring it towards me again. Having a heck of a time holding on to that. There we go. Now, got to find my front and back of this is the back of my bead. This is the front. So I know I need to cut that off on the back. It's sticking out there. So that's going to be my back side. I'm going to tighten this up. And just make sure that they're doing the same thing. And I'm just going to squeeze this around a little bit more. Because this is going to sit, that's right, like that. So I need to squeeze this around the back a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to cut that on an angle, and even more so of one. And I'm going to file it. Let me get my pliers because I've just got such a small amount of working room. And then I'm going to do the other one. And I'm going to do that off camera to save time because my videos are dang long. I'm kind of like, what's her name? Vaughn. I love her though. She was great for me in the beginning, and she's just incredibly patient and awesome. I can never remember the actual name. Something Back to Earth Creations. Oh, finally. Okay, so just feeling that. So this is what we have so far. Let me turn it this way. And so we're going to be putting this loop, this through there. So this is our little cuff bracelet link that we're going to be slipping through here. See how easy peasy this is? Before we close this off and create loops in it. And I'm already looking at this and I'm centering it up on my wrist and I'm already making note where it's going to sit, and that's way too long. So I'm probably going to really cut these back. I don't want this sitting here. It'll be too long. Because I have more length on this bead here, I'm going to be cutting this down I'm going to take a good 1/2 inch probably off that length. So you really want to measure up once you have this part done and you have both your beads on. You want to kind of eye it and start rolling your wrist to see where this is going to sit. I want it to set right here over my wrist edge, but not in the middle on each side, because I want to be able to put my links in there. So that's something that you need to pay attention to while you're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the other one and I'll be right back. So this is what we should have. And now it's really important, as I mentioned before, to start to measure. If we know that this is the middle of our bracelet and the length between, this is my 1 inch mark, okay, from here to here. And the length between this bead to this bead, so that's 1 inch, 2 inch, it looks like about almost 2.5 inches. I want my bracelet about without the links, meaning without the jump rings, okay? I want my bracelet, I'm going to measure it down here and tell you in a minute. And that's what I thought. I want this about a total in length of 5 inches, because I want to have at least a good inch or more of jump rings and a hook, right? So that it'll fit anyone. If you make it exactly the size of somebody's wrist and somebody wants it smaller, it's going to be too big. So I want that gap down here. I want my bracelet, I'll show you what I mean here. Do you see where it's ending up at? So it's coming in where these are coming off the side of my wrist. So that I've got a pretty good gap here. I'm going to say about almost a 2 inch gap, right? So that's going to give me enough room to make this for somebody really small, where they can hook all the way up to the first jump ring, or someone with a larger wrist up to 7 1/4, 7 1/2. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to attach this. And I know that I don't want this any more than 5 1/4 inches long. So I'm going to put this in here. And I'm going to measure from this mark to this mark. And that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 inches. I am going to cut this back. I'm going to take it back and I'm going to change it a little bit than this one. I'm going to roll these in even closer because my loops could have been a little smaller, but that's okay, because that's the beauty of this ancient art of wire. So instead of cutting these now, I know that, and you can do this any way you want, but I know that I want my loop to start bending here. And I'm thinking about bringing it under and tucking it over the side. So I'm just doing something a little bit different. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark from where the V starts. I'm going to mark it, since this is a 1/2 inch, I'm going to mark right in between, because I'm going to roll these wires in like a bale. And this is what I mean. You can do anything you want. So here's my V mark. And this is from this point to this point, 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to come in right there just to give me a guide. Okay. And I think I got that on the wrong way. Oh, no, I don't. It twisted. Thank gosh. By the way, always double check front and back. Because once you close these off, you're going to have to make a whole new piece if you make a boo-boo. And it won't be the first time I've made a boo-boo. So just to make myself life easy, I'm going to pull this out of there. I am going to get my second step. And I am going to, on the outside of where I made my mark, I'm going to push here with my thumb, holding this firmly, and I am going to rock these back and in, and I'm pushing them in to my piece. So this is what you should have. We're going to have a really cool change up on this. See that? This is going to be really cool. I like it. Then I'm going to make sure I got this in the front. Make sure, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to get my second step on the outside of that mark. I'm going to hold firmly here, and I'm pushing and rocking this back. So this is what we should have so far. Now, if you didn't make yours as long as mine, you can just make a little loop on the bottom, okay? And then just tie them off with some half-round wire. You could also weave, whatever your vision is. Let me show you this side. It's a little bit easier without that tag in the way. So this is what I'm talking about. All I'm doing now is making this whole thing a loop, and I'm going to bring it through up and under these 2 wires. So let's do that. So I'm going to put this back in just to keep it from pulling down too much. There we go. Because you want some stability, and you don't want these wires here to come together, meaning smash down. All I'm doing now, because this is 16 gauge wire, is I'm using my thumb and I'm pushing them through until I can get them up. See where I'm going with this? And this is going to dangle around and get in your way. So now I'm still keeping my pliers in here as an anchor because I don't want to lose that loop. And I'm going to switch hands now because I need my right hand. So I'm going to put these back in there, turn them around because I need working room and I need my dominant hand to do what I really need to do now. So I am going to pull this wire this way without trying to compromise. And I may have to take this out, you guys. Let me just separate them. I just wanted you to see without blocking. Okay, at least I got a good space between them, right? So because it's 16 gauge, it's going to be hard to push. But just do the best that you can because you can see where I'm going with this. It's almost as if I'm making a bail, right? Then I'm going to wrap this around and this around. And you may need your chain nose so that you don't compromise the integrity of your shape. And I'm just going to wrap that around. You got to watch that you don't change your loops too much. I already saw that I did that. Do you see what I mean here? And it's good that these happen because you get to see how I make corrections. So I'm just folding that out. I'm going to run my pliers back through there. I really need to have those in there now to line these up. Because that's really going to keep everything in shape. I'm just coming from underneath, squeezing those in. And I'm bringing that wire to the neck here, because I'm going to cut it. So this is kind of what we're looking at. And they'll all line up here in a minute because I'm going to connect these. I'm still going to use connecting wire. All right, so let me just kind of line those up. Then I'm going to get my flush cutters, and these are my super flush because this is 16 gauge. Take a little bit off each side. I'm going to put my pliers back in here. I don't want to lose that shape. And this is the only way that I'm going to keep it. You see that? And I am just going to squeeze this in on both sides. Got to get that dangle out of my way. Sorry about my hands, you guys. I'm going to need to switch this around. You always want to be in a good working position because that's going to give you so much more leverage. There we go. So this is what we got, and I'm going to tie them off. I am absolutely going to tie these two off. I could just leave them like this because they're not going to go anywhere. And I'm just squaring them up. See that? Just squaring them up. And they're really not going to go anywhere. And we're going to shape this. We're going to curve this into the wrist. But I want to tie them up anyways. I could just put a jump ring in here and be done. But we really want it secure as possible. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to bring my pliers through just to give me support. And I am pushing my wires up, and I need to change my position. Start pulling those through. There we go. Then I'm going to turn around. And I really want to separate these like on a V. And this is going to be the hardest part. If you're a beginner and you just want to try it for practice, but I wouldn't recommend giving, well, you could give it to anybody, but it's not going to hold up if it's not a strong enough gauge wire because the wrist really takes a beating. Go ahead and practice on 18 gauge, but really hammer the dickens out of it. I mean, really harden that wire, but not to the point where it's going to snap, because you have to remember that this is sitting on somebody's wrist. So now I'm going to run my pliers through there again. I'm just creating working positions for myself. Kind of get this out of my way a little bit. And I just want to bring that up. And I'm kind of pinching it in towards itself. And I'm going to switch my position. And then I'm going to trim them. And I'm going to squeeze them in to each other. And the same thing on this side. Kind of angle this up a little. Okay, so this is the back, and there's nothing sharp, and this is what we have so far. So now we're going to shape these, and I've pre-shaped them in the beginning before and pre-shaped them after, and I think it's just a personal choice. You You could do without beads if you want and just have your focal bead. And all I'm going to do is just kind of bend this in. Now, you could use a ring mandrel, and you want to come down to where it's pretty big, and you're just going to push, not a lot. I don't want a huge arc, just a little bit. And then I'm going to do the other side, because this is going to hug your wrist. Then I'm going to lay it down and see how it's hugging on my wrist. And I like that. And now let's take a look at my back. And that's perfect. I wanted at least close to a 2-inch gap on the back, and I have it. This is hard to do because I don't have anything holding these together. But you can close off, can you guys see that? You can close off your bracelet the original way I did it. You can close it off any way you want, but I wanted a really good gap in between this part of my wrist and this so that it's, again, a multi-fit. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just squaring off. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I can see this needs to come up a little bit. And I'm just bending them back and forth to square them off. Because all I'm going to do is run a piece of wire through here just to secure them really, really good. So I'm going to get some 24. If you don't have 24, use 26 or 22. But I don't have big space there, meaning I don't have a lot of working room. So all I'm going to do is come through here. I'm going to go down through the middle. And I'm just connecting them. That's all. You know what, you guys? I changed my mind. If you've watched my videos before, you all know I do that a lot. Because nothing's in stone to me. This is the ancient art of wire, which means it's whatever you visualize. And the beauty about this art is we're constantly seeing things change. So I'm actually going to come down below the neck, and I'm going to do 3 wraps. Snug that up. I just wanted to secure these together. You don't have to, like I said, all you got to do is just put a jump ring in there and you're good to go. But I like things really secure, and I'm going to straighten this out a little bit. I don't like the way it's turning out. And now, come down a little bit. I need to slide this down. Let me see if I like that. And I don't like that. So, kink my wire pretty bad, but this is pretty heavy gauge. So I am going to do an under-over. Three times. And I think that should do it. Yeah, pretty happy with that. So I'm going to cut, here's a tip for beginners. And this was hard for me to learn when I was starting out, how to cut my weaving wire, where to cut it, how to cut any wire, right? You always want to cut on the inside so it never touches the front or the back. And you want to cut it shorter than what you think so it doesn't rest on the top. And then the same thing here. I'm going to cut on the inside as much as I can because that's up pretty high and it's hiding under this loop. So tuck this in again. And you could do a figure 8 all the way, but I wouldn't get too elaborate with too much weaving up here. Remember, this is on somebody's wrist. So it's going to get some banging around. Trying to figure out where that went. Okay, I'm going to do the other side and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've secured both my sides with just a little gentle weaving. I used a 24 gauge weaving wire. And here's what we've got so far. And it's hugging our wrist pretty good. I'm going to continue to make some adjustments of molding this. I call it a bracelet cufflink. You know, I'm just molding it more, seeing how it's resting and where it's resting on my wrist. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just, you can actually push it against your wrist bone if you wanted, but you want them to line up evenly. Now, I'm going to measure my piece, and I have exactly 5 inches. And this is perfect for me, what I personally like, because I want, again, that gap space. So you've got 2 inches minimum to work with jump rings and a hook. You could also use a lobster clasp. I prefer hooks on most of my bracelets, depending on what style it is. So this hook already is over a 1/2 inch long. It's almost close to 3/4. So I know that I'm going to need jump rings, and I'm going to do big jump rings, and I'm going to do 16 gauge. And because I want it nice and strong and durable. And I want some pretty big jump rings because I want somebody to be able to really get that hook in there. And if you haven't made jump rings with your 6-step bail pliers before, really give them a go. I'm going to use the number 5 step. And what you're going to do, and this is a great tip and technique, is you want the outside of your wire, meaning the starting of your wire, you want it to run on the top. You don't want it tucking down below. So I'm going to try to show this to you on the spool. So I've got my wire sticking out, and I'm going to bend it on an angle a little bit because I want, and I'm just turning my wrist towards me and away from me while I'm guiding that wire. I want the wire that's coming off the spool to wire down. And the reason is because it gives me all that room for the wire to go up. So if you notice, I'm holding my finger on the back and then coming around. Don't worry about it lifting up like that. I'm doing that so that you can see what I'm doing. I am now going to push that down. And don't worry about that first piece of wire that it's not snug. We're going to cut that off. So now I'm going to start my rotations. And if you notice, it looks like I'm rolling down into the plier, but it's actually rolling up. And that's all we're doing is rolling up. And don't worry about the separation. None of that's a big deal. It's because I'm working off the spool, you guys, and it's twisting on me. So I'm going to continue this and I'll be right back. So I've cut myself 5 jump rings, and I used the 5th step. You can use any size you want. And I've connected them together, and then all I'm going to do is attach them to the loops in my bracelet. And I'm just rocking them together until I feel them snapping into each other. I'm just doing a little rock. So now I'm going to measure. And I know this is 1 inch. So now I've given myself so far a 6.5 inch bracelet, which it's going to be perfect, which means I'm going to be adding a link onto this side with a hook. And I'm going to show you. You can make any type of hook. These are also known as shepherd's hooks. So here's an example, and this is pretty big one. I don't know if I would use this on this bracelet, but I could easily. And it would give me up to a 7 inch bracelet. But I'm going to show you how to make a shepherd's hook. And ladies and gentlemen, we're done. So I'm going to cut myself 3 inches. You want to use a minimum of 18 gauge. And if you're going to use 18 gauge, you want to make sure that you hammer it, because it needs to be nice and strong and hold up. Remember, the wrist gets a lot of banging. So I'm going to cut the ends even though I might have excess. And I am going to get my round nose, and I'm going to make a little tiny loop. And I am going to, as many of you know me by now, I hate blunt ends. I don't like them flush. So I am just tapering that end by rolling off the tip. Plus I want a very, very tiny closed loop here. And I want it as small as I can possibly get it. Then I'm going to grab my chain nose and I'm going to squeeze that in, or I'm going to try. And don't worry if your wire bends like that. We're going to adjust that. It's all fixable. Okay, so I'm just making a little mess here, but I'm going to fix that too. All right, now I'm going to straighten my wire. I showed you how I did that in the beginning. And because I have dinged the dickens out of it, you see that? I'm going to buff it. And I'm actually going to use my file this time because I kind of want a flattened look anyways. And that's what this does. It gives it a flat, almost like hammered look. Do the same thing on the other side. Then I'm going to get my 6th step. And I'm going to put my little bead up closed in loop here. Just straightening my wire. Okay. And I'm going to use my 5th step, and I'm going to turn the 5th step towards me, and I'm going to have the loop facing away from me, but I want a little length on that loop. So if I looked at that length, I would say that's about 1/4 of an inch. And all I'm going to do is loop it around. I'm pushing away from me. You can push into you. It's almost like making an earring hook, but they also call it a shepherd's hook, right? Because we're going to use this to hook into our bracelet. Now at this point, I would go out to my workbench in the garage and I would hammer the dickens out of this because I don't want it to go anymore. And then all I'm going to do is I want to make sure that there's enough distance between where this shepherd's hook, this is the little hook, why they call it a shepherd's hook, because they could hook things on it. I want to make sure that my loop is below that. If it's right up against it, it could get in the way. So I'm just going to come down a little bit, and I am going to bend this back. So do you see what I mean by the distance between the hook on the loop and where I've made my bend? Because I don't want my loop right here getting in the way. So if it was curling in. So anyways, everybody has their own technique. This is mine. So all I'm going to do is roll this towards me, and I'm using the 2nd step, and I'm going to close it off. I don't want it to have any possibility of coming undone. And like we did with making our loops for our beads and closing them off, I'm going to do the same thing on my shepherd's hook because it will be a jump ring attaching that. So I'm just going to get my chain nose, hold it very securely, and bring this forward. And I'm just swinging it around. And I'm tightening it around that wire. I'm squaring it up, Just making sure that it's sliding up against that neck right, and bringing it around. Now I know that my hook is either going to be coming into the side or on the top, unless you want your hook to come underneath. I don't like what I call underhooking. Don't like it. It's uncomfortable for me. So I want to make sure that this loop is sitting when I close it off on the side or on the top. So if I know I'm going to be hooking this way, I'm going to be hooking this way, I want this to probably sit on top. So I am going to bring it around, because I know I got enough room to bring it around one more time. And I'm going to have it ride right here. And you might be thinking, oh, she's got it on top. She doesn't like things exposed like that. Well, it's different with everything. So, and then I'm going to shave that down. Now, in the meantime, you're going to be hammering all of that. And I'm going to do as I did before. I'm going to cut that on an angle and really shave that top off. And then, of course, I'm going to sand that down. And then all we're going to do is put it in the jump ring. And you could add a dangle, anything that you want. I'm a righty, so I want to make sure my hook is going to the right. And I am just going to close this off. And here is our darling, adorable. And this is what I mean, everybody. Do you see that now? We've got space to work with, and I can pull this up to the second one based on my wrist size. Now, I stretched that out already, so this is really good for beginners to understand. That's 18 gauge wire, and I opened it up, and it was closed down like this because it's not hammered. So that's really good that you saw that, or I pointed it out. But here we go. Isn't that the cutest? And you can use any bead, any B-side. If you look at this bracelet, I did a tutorial on how to make a double bail gemstone cabochon, how to wrap a cabochon with double bails. But you can use any gemstone size. If you were going to use something this big that was drilled through, you just need to probably not have connector beads and really focus on the band. But isn't that cute? And then you could just drop a bead from it like this, where it could hang from the back. And it's just the cutest little thing. And it's just so sweet. And it wears beautifully. Make sure that you mold this around the edge of your wrist. You can use a really big piece of wood, dowel, or your hands. And there you have it. Thank you so much, everybody, for being a part of this wonderful community in the ancient art of wire. I wish for all of you all that you wish for yourselves. And as Thumper said in Bambi, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Have a beautiful, fabulous, magical wire wrap day. Bye for now, everybody.